they have 7 websites. Products were called different things on different websites, even though they were the same product.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, which is built for revenue leaders who aren't afraid to say they're stuck and they actually need a real answer. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of operations and revenue. Today's podcast is sponsored by the great team at Virtual Causeway. Imagine your sales team spending less time chasing and more time closing because buyers already know your name before that first call. That's exactly what Virtual Causeway does. They help B2B companies get found earlier in the buying process by the right people through the right channels and actually influence decisions today. Well, what's the result? It's fewer cold calls, it's better conversations, and it's pipeline that moves faster. You can learn more about them at virtualcauseway.com, and don't forget to mention the show for a special rate. Now, most founders think that getting to 2x revenue is a milestone. Well, my guest today will actually tell you it's where the problems start, because growth creates operations crisis before it even becomes a revenue win. My guest today is Michael Kleinman. In 2001, Michael built Fresh Pair out of a New York City apartment, one of the first online retailers for intimate apparel, and he scaled that to an 8-figure revenue business with more than 30,000 SKUs and partnerships with over 150 brands before he sold it in 2011. Now, that's just the beginning of this story. He launched Underwear Expert as a content brand in 2012 and built one of the most read editorial platforms in the men's apparel category before he pivoted it into a subscription business in 2015. Across both of those companies, he's held the titles of CEO, COO, CMO, CTO, and CFO jobs, not in theory, but in reality and in practice. Now, something I found fascinating about my research of Michael is that before content marketing was a category, he invented a national holiday, the National Underwear Day, as an SEO strategy. Now, that's the kind of founder instincts that's really hard to teach. Today, he advises D2C and subscription brands through his consultancy, powered by MK, and he's pretty clear that the thing killing most brands isn't weak marketing, it's the operations they didn't build before the growth hit. Michael, welcome to the Revenue Problem Solvers, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, hopefully I didn't say anything that was not true. I had a blast doing some research about you and truly fascinated. So especially that holiday, brilliant. Well done.
Thank you.
So to kick us off, can you share with us a little bit about your world? Give us a little context. What industries or verticals do you work in? What are the selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Sure. I try to stay in B2C, but sometimes I get involved in other projects if they're interesting. But we consult on B2C companies, mostly Shopify, Shopify Plus, apparel, supplements, grooming, anything with a shippable, physical shippable product. And while my background does include a lot of underwear related things, we do work with various underwear and underwear adjacent things, but we could work with any product really. So doesn't have to be underwear.
Well, everybody needs it, so it's a good thing to get into. So how we got to today's topic is I asked Michael, just like I ask everybody, hey, what's a successful revenue initiative you ever led or an existing challenge you're either solving or have solved? And we really had a great conversation, and we got into the conversation about how operations is sometimes a revenue problem. And in the conversation, he talked to me a little bit about a customer story. And so if I can start the conversation like this, Michael, when you told that client that you told me about this story, you told the client that, hey, you need to consolidate from 7 websites into 1. What was the reaction in the room?
Yeah. So for a little context, we had a client that had been around for more than a decade, and they had multiple Shopify sites selling various apparel brands that they own, and some sites sold multiple brands that they owned. So when I came in, I was trying to figure out how to have the biggest impact on that business. And And the first thing I looked at was the foundation. And I think as someone who has dealt with a lot of different D2C situations, including my own, a lot of the problems stem from having a broken foundation. So when we first go in, we look at the foundation and see what's going on. And I noticed that the entire company was doing everything times 7. There was just 7 of everything. And so I started diving deeper into it. Why do we have websites? What do they do? Why do we have this and that? And it turns out we really needed one website. The reason that the client had 7 is because they had the wrong people giving them advice, and they had done things for a certain amount of time, and it was just wrong. So it was very interesting because I've never seen anything that bad before. But we were able to consolidate 7 into 1, and some of the brands we got rid of because they weren't doing anything, and it had a transformative impact on that business. It was probably one of the biggest changes anyone has ever made to that business in more than a decade. It was crazy, yeah.
So when you went into it, did you look at it and say, okay, you got 7 brands? Were they, and I like that you talk about the foundation, because a lot of the things that my personal background has been able to look at is, and I have a belief in, I don't know if you've ever known the story of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the reason that it is the way that it is, but a lot of revenue teams, I think, there's a really good analogy there, because with the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it was built in a way and they didn't focus on the foundation, which is why you have that quirky appeal of it being lean. It's leaning. But they actually had to spend a lot of money to just try to solidify that foundation so it doesn't actually fall over. And I use that analogy a lot of times with revenue teams, because if you don't focus on the foundation, it really doesn't matter how big of a skyscraper you want to build, because if it's not solid, it's not going to work. And it sounds like you did the same thing for this revenue team or this company. And my question that's sort of underpinning all of this is, when you looked at it, were they, I'll say, chasing shiny things because they're trying to be everything to everybody? Or were they actually trying to build a brand portfolio and just got lost in the shuffle?
I think it's something I see many times, where you have a creative person running a company and you need a business person running a company. And so I think, they were well intentioned, but they just weren't working on the right things. And this company specifically, they had 3 of the websites were the same brand but localized for different countries, and the other 4 websites were different brands. And long story short, they had some brands that they needed to get rid of because they just weren't brands that made sense anymore. And they had done a lot of custom things, and the people that were handling, web related projects were just not experienced enough. So they were just doing a lot of things that were not best practices, and over a long period of time. I think the founder was just very resistant to changing anything, but also the founder had no knowledge of technology. So, if you're a creative person, you don't understand technology, you're adverse to change, you have people giving you advice that don't know what they're doing, you just wind up with like a cluster of like all the wrong things for a very long time. So that's kind of where they started. And then I came in and I said, okay, you have all these brands, your attention is kind of divided by all these brands. Do you need all these brands? Let's look at the revenue. And it turns out they really didn't need all these brands. Some of them were old ones that they hadn't made any new product in years. So we got rid of the brands they didn't need. That reduced the complexity, right? Then we took the main brand that had multiple Shopify sites for different countries, and I consolidated them, because Shopify Plus has a feature that allows you to do everything globally in one Shopify. And you have all the different tools and features that you need to do all the different things in all the different locations. So we took those 3 that had one brand, consolidated them into one, and then completely rebuilt it from scratch, because their main site wasn't set up correctly either. And it just had like a massive positive impact on the business. It was like
How?
it was like you couldn't even forecast what a impact it would have. It was so significant. Yeah.
So Shopify is a Canadian-based company, and actually,
Yes.
they used to have one of the most beautiful offices. I don't know if you've ever been in. It's in Kitchener-Waterloo, but it's in an old whiskey factory. It's called
Hmm.
the Seagram's Building, and you
Hmm.
walk in, and it was beautiful before they moved and went fully remote.
Hmm.
But in their office, they had this giant screen that would show you all the pings of where things were being bought through their platform. It was a pretty cool thing. And when they had Black Friday sales, or even uh, one of the Kardashian sisters, I'm not sure which one. I can't remember which one. The makeup, whoever has the makeup line. But
Okay.
when they launched a flash sale, that
Hmm.
board went bananas. It was it was
Sure.
lit up like crazy. But just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful location. And I'm saying that because I'm picturing those lines go from wherever the person bought to where it was being sold to in that screen. But when you talk about having multiple sites, how does that get overlooked by companies?
I mean, I think if you have people that, are focused on other things and that's not their area of expertise, they don't even know what they don't know. So they don't know the questions to ask. And, a lot of founders, and I've definitely had this problem early on in my career, a lot of founders will have a number two person at the company that knows just a little bit more than they do about certain things. And that person becomes important person at the company because they hold the keys to everything. And usually a lot of it is technology. And these people are really good in the very beginning of a company, but then if the company wants to scale, these people can be the worst thing at a company because they're holding the company back, or they just don't have the knowledge to advise, like, how do you go from 1 million to 10 million to 50 million? It's not that same person, right? Like in a
Mhm.
rare situation would it be that person. So this client had people that were well intentioned but just not experienced, and the person that had the most knowledge about technology really had like a fraction of the knowledge that they needed to run a complex organization. So with Shopify, you can have as many warehouses as you want and sell to as many countries as you want, and you have all the various currencies support, and you can have different legal entities, and like you can basically set it up so you can have a more complex organization using it, right?
Mhm.
It may not work in 100% of use cases, but I'd say 99% of use cases, it can do pretty much everything that you need. And whatever it can't do is probably not even worth it when you can consolidate everything under one roof. So I consolidate everything under one roof. And when we got towards the end of the project, we realized that one of their biggest brand had 3 websites. That means that every single person that worked at that company had to do everything for that one brand 3 times. Add a product to 3 different Shopifys, put a product description in 3 different Shopifys, do everything times 3. And with, I mean, everything was done manually across the whole entire organization, which means you have a lot of human error.
Mhm.
So if you do everything times 3 and you're doing it manually, what is the chance that someone's going to make a mistake? That's like very high, right? So
Mhm.
so they wound up having huge data discrepancy issues because everything was done 3 times by different people in different places over many years, and I had to figure out a way to unravel all of that also, and really kind of like clean the data. So it was a very interesting project because we had to fix a moving bus, right, without breaking it, and and I don't think they even realized it at the time, but all these data cleaning things that we did and all of these kind of streamlining things that we did set them up really nicely for optimizing across for agentic commerce,
Hmm.
because this was essentially a data cleanup project, which will make it significantly easier for them to be found in ChatGPT when someone is searching for something. So yeah, it was one of many very, very interesting projects that we did with this client.
When you went in, when you uncovered this, was this known? Did the founder and did the teams actually know that there was this disjoint? Can I say disjointed? Is that a fair thing to say?
I think that is a very nice way of saying it.
Okay, well, let's be kind. We'll lead with kindness. But did they actually know that it was disjointed and they had three times the teams working on the same project?
This was a very unique situation. The founder knew that there were problems, but every single time I've been brought into a company that has problems, they never really tell you how big the problems are.
Mm.
They tell you they have problems, but they probably don't even really know what the problems are. They know that like revenue's not growing, or they're losing money, or they have issues with this or this. They say things, but you really have to look at the details to kind of validate their concerns, right? And then come up with a plan. So this client was very interesting. They had their own view of the business and what the issues were and what needed to be done. And then I had to, kind of make my own assessment. And they said, make your own assessment. Nothing's nailed down. Figure out what you need to do. So I started with the most basic things. How do I get like an immediate positive impact for this client so they can kind of start to build some trust with me? Because as I start to suggest more aggressive changes, you need to have that trust built, right? So first, I have to figure out how to save them some money immediately on something that they get excited about. And then I need to come up with a, midterm, long-term list also of maybe things that might need to be negotiated. So, early on, I saved them a lot of money on something that I found in the first few days of working with them. And then we came up with this, project plan basically, of which had like some small things and some big things. And in that plan was this Shopify thing, and the Shopify thing of consolidating them, ballooned into a massive project. I mean, it's if I was still working with that client, that project would still be going on, because taking a company that's 15 years old that did things a certain way for so long and evolving them, it could take years depending on how complex it is. Very interesting client.
When you went into work with this client, was that the original hypothesis of something's broken, or did they just say, "Hey, you know what, Michael? I really need some help. I know that we're not growing as fast as we can. Can you help figure it out?" So what part was it? Was it a known problem and you just had to drive and solve the problem for that growth like you talked about earlier? Or
Yeah.
was it I just don't know what I don't know. Can you help me unlock growth?
Well, I think it was, I think founders reach a certain point where they know they've taken it as far as they can take it. And in order to get to the next level, they know they need experts, and every business is different, right? So this business specifically, they needed someone with like specific knowledge of their product and of the product category, which I have, and knowledge of e-commerce and marketing in general. They came at it from the perspective that the company was just stuck, and they had an idea about all the different issues, but they didn't know how to fix them. Otherwise, they would have fixed it. And they tried, with different people over many years to fix things, but nothing really materialized. And so when I came in, it was a bit of like validate their concerns, come up with a plan, execute the plan, but it kind of morphed into something totally different. Again, this is a very unique client, but it morphed into something different because there wasn't anyone at the company who could really execute complex projects. So I could come up with the best ideas in the world and no one would be able to do them. So this client really turned into me running the company and me instituting my strategy, which turned out to be pretty successful for them. And I grew their US business 100% in 15 months. And this
Wow.
business had been around for more than a decade. So it's, it wasn't like it was a startup and they grew $1 and it was a high percentage. Like this was an existing business with a lot of complex challenges. And again, like if I was still working with this client, we would be getting into like, deeper level things and more advanced things. But what was interesting about this client is that, and we only take on clients that I'm interested in, because if it's not fun, I don't want to be involved. I want it has to be a fun project. So I took this client on because I thought that this was a really good one, and I knew that this could be $100 million business. I knew that this could scale kind of very significantly. So in the time that we were there, we had a very significant lasting impact on that organization. It was very interesting, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
I like you said, actually I had a gentleman, Ross Paquette. He's the CEO and founder of a company called Marrow Post. And when I had him on the podcast, we were talking about that and hitting a ceiling. And for him, he said, look, my ceiling was 30 million. I was really good at getting to 30 million. As soon as we got above 30 million, things would break. I didn't know how to get above the 30 million. And he said, I needed to bring somebody in who knew, the 30 to $50 million window, because it's different and you have to break things. And as part of that, you also said something else that I really like. I don't know if you know Brian Chesky, if you know who that is, the founder of Airbnb. I listened to a podcast to him a long time ago because actually the CEO who I worked for last, Emmerich Arnault, he's a big believer in this. And he says, leaders are in the details. And at some point you get to, like you're saying, is the details are things that you need to know, but you actually just don't know because it's maybe too big for you. So I say all that as sort of like a lead up. When you went in, do you have a framework, or do you have a list of things, or a cadence or a rigor or something that you go, okay, look, I'm going to enter into the business and these are the places I'm going to look for to unlock growth? I'm not sure if that's the right question to ask, or if you have something like that.
It really depends on the stage of the business. So, if it's a startup and we come in, it's a totally different set of things that we do, right? Most of them are being done for the first time. So, it's easy and it's hard, but it's a different easy and a different hard, Whereas if it's an established business, unraveling things can, take a really long time, and understanding things. So if it's an existing business and we come in, I usually go for the financials first, because I don't believe the financials until my team validates the financials. And I also need to understand the financials. That way I can show the company the impact that I've had. If I'm going to improve gross profit by 1%, I need to make sure the financials are correct, because you need to be able to see that, right? So at the end of the day, whatever the impact is that we have, I need to be able to show where it was and how it happens, and tell the story. So we start with the financials. In parallel to that, because I can have someone on my team work on that in parallel to discovery projects, right? So then we'll do some discovery and try to figure out like where things are broken. And I think a lot of it is my gut, because I've done this now for 25 years. So my gut will drive like where I think the issues are. And then I'll validate that, by, looking into it in detail. I weeds on things, but I have the ability to also do the super big picture. And that's only because I've been doing this for a while. And I think at my first company, kind of starting in a New York City apartment and scaling it the way I did, I had every job in that company at some point. And that really helped me focus on like really understanding a business, and being I need to be able to do every job in the business to understand the business so that I can lead the business, and kind of just extracting that and putting that into consulting. a little different. But taking this client as an example, sales were stagnant, and they weren't happy with the quality. Those were the initial things. So first, I validated financials and spent a long time trying to get the financials to a point where I felt they were accurate. And then I had to understand why sales were stagnant. And in understanding why sales are stagnant, you're looking at their technology, you're looking at their marketing, right? And everything in between. And then it's coming up with a list of, the 200 different things that you need to look at based on each situation, prioritizing them in terms of impact. And then you just start. And, when you look into one thing, you might uncover another thing. So you have this problems that you're, working through. And then it's a delicate balance of like what you do first and how you fix it, because you have a business that is still running.
Mm-hmm. So with the sales being stagnant, like, or are we saying, we'll just use simple math. They were doing $1 million a month for 10 months in a row. Like they were just consistent with having the same amount. Now, was there a difference between their top line and their bottom line? Meaning their bookings were $1 million, but their revenue was actually not growing. And was that the clue for you to start to dig into the operations and say, okay, hold on a second. How come, like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the revenue was stagnant for several years, and when I looked at it, my first gut reaction was that nothing was set up correctly. So before I change marketing strategies or suggest that we spend more money on marketing or bring in more marketing channels or do anything there, right? If the foundation is not correct, then anything I add on to it is going to be inefficient spend. And then that's going to cause a profitability issue. So before I even start scaling marketing, I need to figure out what's wrong. And then I got into this whole thing with, they have 7 websites. Some, on Shopify, you have apps that have functionality. So you could have each app times 7, right? Which is like very expensive. And in the situation where they had one brand that had 3 Shopifys, there was a massive amount of issues. I mean, products were called different things on different websites, even though they were the same product. And there were SEO issues. There were just like a million problems. So I started with, let's redo the entire website, not only the front end, but how all the data is structured, how the products are structured. And then, that was like a year of hundreds of different mini projects to do all that. But the net result is that it had a massive positive impact. So the first thing I did was we started looking at financials, and then we went to the warehouse configuration, and we tried to look at how the warehouse was configured. And in the first month working with them, I saved them tens of thousands of dollars just because the freight logic was incorrectly configured for shipping orders. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was wild. It was it was crazy. And then we put a new theme in to Shopify and kind of redid all the apps and how everything was set up. And I mean, in the first 4 months, I think we increased the conversion rate on the website like 30 to 40% just by fixing things and simplifying things. And this client was very interesting because there were so many things that were wrong, and there's so many things that just weren't done at all, that there was just like an unlimited amount of things to look into and do. They could have used like 10 of me, full time.
Wow.
So there's so much to do. Yeah.
What was that like for you with that transition to change? Because change is hard. And like you
Mhm.
said, we've done it this way for a while, right? Like the
Yeah.
most dangerous words in business, we've always done it this way. So now you have a good idea, you have a structure, and okay, great.
Mhm.
I have a game plan. How does that game plan get received by the team for trying to do something totally different?
So it was very interesting. The founder was the person that it took the longest to convince about things.
Really?
Yeah, because like even though this person hired me and wanted to change, they didn't really understand how to run an e-commerce business at all, and they were kind of stuck in like, you know, how were things run 10 years ago, and a limited knowledge of that. So when you were having conversations about more advanced technology or marketing related things, like it was hard to convince them to do certain things. But I think with founder run companies, it all comes down to the psychology of the founder. It doesn't even matter what the idea is. It doesn't matter if it's a good idea or not. It matters what the psychology of the founder is. Like, how trusting are they of other people? How many times have they been burned in the past? Um, are they trying to prove something to their dad? Like that, those are the things that become the most important in the conversation, not the actual specifics of that thing that you're talking about.
Hmm.
Moving to a new theme on Shopify is not like they like if they knew anything about that, they would have done it already.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's about trusting you, thinking about the potential, being sold on the potential of the business to kind of like your dream is. Like that's usually where it goes. Um usually you start these business conversations with founders and they don't end as business conversations.
It ends as more of a personal attack.
Not attack, it's more about the psychology of the founder and the client, and like how and like what is meaningful to them and what's important to them and what their own challenges are. Like
Mm.
that's what it all comes down to, and like how change averse are they? you know um
Hmm. I like that. How change averse are they? Because it's interesting. You got two dynamics happening at the same time. Michael, I know I need help. I need your help. Can you help me? But then the same time you have this like, yeah, but is kind of what I'm hearing. You have this like, yeah, but I like this.
a lot, yeah, and I think a lot of times they have like one foot in and one foot out, right? And they're not really committed. Like they hire you because they want to fix the company, but they're afraid to do things. And sometimes there are also like unrealistic expectations. A lot of people think you hire a consultant and like they're going to fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not how it works. The consultant is supposed to help work with you and your team. And the consultant is not your CEO, and the consultant is not full-time and does not have ownership of your business. Like consultant is brought in for a specific purpose, right? And but again, every client is different. I mean, this client was a particularly complex and difficult client, but they were very different from a lot of other clients. Each one has its own, pluses, I guess.
Hmm. Okay, so what I've heard from this journey, you came in, you figured out that they have 7 websites, they are doing too much. Their operation, everything is sort of triplicated because of multiple locations and languages and sites. You also determine the freight logic. Now you got into some of the back end system, or you validated
Mhm.
the finances. You said, okay, here's where I can go. You start to show early signs of like of savings, and it sounds like savings would be also growth.
Oh yeah, I mean, we saved them. I mean, in the first few months, we saved them enough money to cover our fees for 12 months.
Wow.
Yeah, we paid for ourselves. I was very happy about that.
Yeah. So did that then unlock, like, what did that then unlock? Did you then
Yeah.
go, okay, so now we're taking you from 7 websites into one, and it's all going to be into a branded house versus a house of brands. It kind of almost seems like that's where you took them.
Well, yeah, I mean, they basically, again, the founder is very creative and, is really quite good at certain things, but company, he needed a professional manager he needed to hire a CEO basically a long time ago. Right. And I think, by not doing that, he wound up in a situation where things were just not optimized. So I came in with a limited engagement to optimize. And then as I started optimizing, that expanded my engagement with them to optimize more things. And um, and I think for there's, I guess, the consolidated version of what our impact was in the US in 15 months we grew revenue by 100%. In 15 months, we grew the Amazon revenue by 333%. We increased the average order size. And, you know, like there were just a ton of positive things that we did with this client. So, um,
Okay, those numbers are in if they're
yeah,
100% growth, a 333% growth. How, like, what was the big transition? You said 7 into 1, but what else did you have to do in order to sort of streamline them and put them down
yeah.
a path for growth?
So I wound up taking over, again, very unique client. The founder was not really a full-time founder. They were involved in other things. So where I started to see them just not show up to meetings or not do certain things, I just stepped in because it needs leadership. And in order to double or triple a business, you have to be very involved. So I started getting involved in things that the founder wasn't. One of them happened to be directing their marketing agency. So the marketing agency was successful before I got there, limited success. And then once I got involved, then the marketing that this agency started doing became more successful because I was able to institute internal projects to support the marketing agency. And the same for Amazon. I fired their Amazon agency and brought in my own Amazon agency that I work with, who's excellent. If anyone needs an Amazon agency, they're really good. And I've limited Amazon experience. Over the years, I've done millions of dollars on Amazon, but like I didn't do it personally myself. Like I wasn't involved in every detail. So that's why I need an agency. Um, and we took the Amazon business and we like completely revamped it. I mean, we got into the weeds on Amazon, and it was wildly successful. And I instituted all sorts of projects, and it took us a really long time to do them because Amazon takes a long time to change things. And when you have like thousands of SKUs, it's going to take a minute. Yeah, and it was very successful. I mean, all the Amazon metrics improved very significantly. Um, and I mean, it's gonna continue to grow. I mean, if it's managed correctly, it's gonna grow very, very big.
Did you see a change of the revenue per SKU? So because of your adjustments and savings, were you able to bring down some of those costs? Like you said, the freight logic. So now
Mhm.
you're not spending as much on freight logic, which means that you have more revenue per SKU. Or was it that, or did you have like a total savings because and this is going to sound bad, but you potentially, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but, or did
Mhm.
you say, we got rid of a bunch of tech. We actually saw people we didn't actually need these people, or like you said, we brought a new Amazon group in that was actually a better outcome for us and the previous ones? Like, was it a cost cutting, or was it an increase, or was it a marginal change? Like, what
Yeah.
was the shift?
So whenever I do cost cutting, it's like either you're cutting costs and you're never spending that money again, which means you never should have spent it to begin with, or you're cutting it from one place to kind of spend it somewhere else, right? I don't know. Sometimes you don't really know, depending on the situation. With this business, I had to be careful because it wasn't my business and I didn't really know every detail of everything. But um, throughout our time working with this client, there were consultants and agencies and things that, apps and all sorts of, and people that we got rid of because they were either extremely antiquated in how they operated, or they were too expensive, or they had no impact to the company and they were just like collecting a check. So we made it more efficient, right? And then whatever money we saved, we spent it on the right resources for whatever that thing was. So if it was replacing a piece of software with a better piece of software, maybe that's one example. Another example would be maybe it's a piece of software we didn't need at all because Shopify already did that. And they just didn't know that Shopify had that built in. Or maybe it was, a marketing agency that you didn't really need because it was duplicated effort between that agency and one of the other agencies. So we kind of just like streamlined it a bit, which, had a very big impact on expenses. But on the freight thing that you mentioned earlier, by optimizing freight and doing a lot of other things, which is we have like 10 more episodes we could talk about these details in. By going through all that other stuff, we were able to get gross profit to improve. So imagine like you're scaling a company and your gross profit is improving, right? What you don't normally hear that. Normally,
Right.
as you, right? You would normally have gross profits stay the same or potentially decline as you scale. Maybe depending on the type of product, there are not you don't have efficiencies as you scale, right? Maybe you have more discounting, or I don't know. Every type of product is different, right? But we were able to get gross profit to go up a lot, which was felt really good because I think the reason I own my own businesses and the reason I do consulting and the reason I do all of this is because there's a lot of satisfaction in winning, and there's a lot of satisfaction in creating things from scratch and seeing the results of all of your hard work. So for me, it's fun, to see those things.
Yeah, winning's fun, and winning cures a lot of things, right? Like when you're winning, people don't ask questions. The moment that you start tying or losing, everything's on the table and we got to dig into it, right? Michael, I told you I'd get you out of here in an hour, and I'm just looking at the time, and we're almost at 45 minutes sort of thing. So as I have so many more questions, but anyways,
I'm here. Let's do it.
I know you have to go, so maybe there is another conversation we can have on this, because the D2C, the direct to consumer and the business to consumer side of things is a really fascinating insight or world to me, and because I spend a lot of my time on B2B, I have had some D2C to consumer side of things, but now the shift with everything with Amazon and Shopify, fascinating. So maybe there's another episode if you'd be willing to do it another time. But to sort of put a bow on today, I like to ask everybody at the end of the conversation, everybody likes new and nobody likes different, and you were clearly doing both at the same time. For somebody thinking about growth and even thinking about their operations and how that could be a driver for them, what are 2 or 3 actionable things that you say, hey, look, if you're stagnant in growth or whatever, and you need to change, go look at in these 2 or 3 areas, or go do these 2 or 3 things on Monday, and it'll actually give you some clues for unlocking growth?
I think the first thing is like you can't be afraid of change, right? If you're going to be afraid of change, then I don't know. You don't need to listen any further, because if you're afraid of change, then like you're happy with where you are, or that's just where you are. You're going to be there forever, and that's it. If you're 1% unhappy with where things are, and you are open to the fact that things could be better, then you have to kind of assume some amount of risk, right? That for there, you have to assume that there's going to be some amount of risk involved with whatever the changes are, and you just have to model that out and make sure that that risk is calculated. I wouldn't bring someone in and let them like disassemble your entire company, but let someone has to prove themselves and develop trust, and you need an expert, right? And then and you probably need to get more involved in certain things when you have someone who is an expert, because they're going to start shining a light on things that you didn't know existed. So I didn't answer your question yet, but what are the things that you should look at Monday? I think the first thing is that people don't really understand their own financials, and in most situations that we've gone into, financials are never. So first, make sure your financials are correct. Know what you don't know in your financials. Look at your gross profit. Talk to other people that are selling similar categories of things. Try to figure out if the numbers don't lie. Try to figure out if the numbers can tell you anything. Okay. And then I think the next thing is, from a Shopify perspective, if you've been operating for several years and you have someone who's in charge of your website, get an independent opinion. A free independent opinion. Get someone to come in. I mean, we do this, depending on the size of the company, but get someone to come in and say everything's set up correctly, or you need like a few little improvements, or everything's terrible. Start there, because if you fix that, you could increase the conversion rate on your website and like double your sales overnight. So I would do that. And the third thing is, everyone works with marketing agencies to some degree, and you can't assume that your agency is the silver bullet. So what you have to manage an agency regardless of what that agency does. And it really helps to have someone internally who knows more than they do, or a consultant who can help manage an agency. Like when we come in, I work for the founder, right? If there's a marketing agency, I make sure that marketing agency is hitting the metrics they need to hit for that founder, right? That marketing agency will partially report to me. I'll fire them if they're not performing, and I'll get someone else who will, right? You need to have that kind of relationship, because if you're just trusting everything that a marketing agency says, they can take you down the wrong path. And then sometimes you're too far down that path to really do anything about it. So getting independent opinions of agencies and managing agencies correctly is really important. I've seen a lot of situations where the agency kind of takes over and they do the wrong things, and then the company is kind of screwed and there's nothing they can do about it. So those are the three things.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree. Great advice is great advice, and if you can get it in the right areas, you're going to do well. Michael, this has been a lot of fun. For people that are like, hey, you know what? I'd really like to talk a little bit more to Michael. Where would you suggest they find you? So I think the easiest thing is to go to my LinkedIn and send a message, and there's a link to it. And if you have a D2C company with challenges, whatever they are, whether you need a quick opinion or whatever, we can help with that. So yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, and we also have a website for the consulting business, mkinc.com, and you could also check out our services there. Awesome. Michael and I have not met before. We've had a couple of actually only one short conversation, and then we did our prelude today. But clearly he knows this area very, very well. And if you work with him, I mean, even I'm more curious. So again, if there is another topic, I'd love to have you back because I think there is a part two, because this world is totally different, and the way that Shopify is changing and the way that Amazon is changing and the whole e-commerce world and everything that's gone into it, especially the way that AI is helping and what are the things that are possibilities. So anyways, I think there's another topic in here, but would really love to do it. But I appreciate you doing this with me today. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
That's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. I want to thank Michael for sharing these incredibly valuable insights and some strategies you can put into action today. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into your opportunities. Thank you for investing your time with us today. We'll see you on the next episode.